And now look to Sam Sussman, Pembroke College, to open the case for the opposition. Hear, hear.
Two people, one land, more than 100 years of bloodshed in which Jews and Palestinians have each proven that they are willing to kill and to be killed to live out their people's aspirations. Who wouldn't envy me up here trying to convince you that peace is now possible while taking Manal's crude and unfounded allegations, all at the same time? When I was first asked to participate in this debate, I was thrilled. As I started writing the speech, I soon became mortified. As a Jewish American who has friends in Israel, in Palestine, in Palestinian communities within Israel, I know that I'll have virtually none of them by the end of the night. So many Montagues, so many Capulets, so few Romeos and Juliets. And yet, for all their differences, Israelis and Palestinians share so much in common. Each has wandered through the desert of exile, statelessness, and oppression. Each knows what it means to be a stranger in another's home. And each, throughout its history, has resolutely refused to give up on its own sacred homeland. The question before us tonight is whether two homelands are attainable, whether two peoples, each the historic victim of profound injustice, can live side by side. An Israel that thrives within safe borders, and a Palestine that prospers in the West Bank and Gaza, with Jerusalem as a shared capital, a limited right of return for Palestinian refugees to Israel, and the full right of return to the future Palestinian state. In short, the very agreement to which Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas came so close in 2008. Before I make the case for why peace is most certainly possible, it falls on me to introduce our most honorable proposition. Manal. Manal. Manal Chima is a fellow Pembrokean with a great sense of humor and exaggeration, studying PPE and cognitive science. Sounds like a lot, maybe, but as Manal will tell you, her interests are politics, philosophy, economics, journalism, military studies, cognitive studies, the law, psychology. Essentially, she's tackling one subject per day of the week. And this makes total sense because Manal also tackles one park and nightclub each day of the week. Secondly, we have Padraig O'Malley, an esteemed professor of international peace and reconciliation at the University of Amherst, University of Massachusetts, Boston, has written numerous books on divided society, has peace expertise and practice in Northern Ireland, South Africa, and Iraq. But a little-known accolade of the professor's is that for 40 years he's run a fine Irish pub in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Now, I asked the professor over dinner, why Cambridge, Massachusetts? Why not Cambridge, England? And he said, and I quote, he said, "There is no one worth having a pint with in that dull and unenlightened little city." Perhaps a little harsh, but I have no empirical evidence to the contrary. Gideon Levy is a tremendous, courageous journalist for Haaretz, award-winning, I must say one of my personal heroes, who has written powerfully about Palestinian life under occupation. However, Mr. Levy is on record saying that his children disagree with his politics so deeply that they no longer read his newspaper articles. Mr. Levy, I wish you much better luck in persuading these children tonight. We all know the obstacles to a two-state solution. It's almost too easy to argue. 500,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank and a rising right-wing political movement that says they must never leave. On the Palestinian side, militant factions such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad who refuse to recognize Israel's very right to exist. I have no interest in naively telling you that peace is obvious, that it is simple, or that it is easy. What I will tell you is three things. Number one, there is no alternative to the two-state solution. To reject it as unattainable is to condemn Israelis and Palestinians to the insecurity and violence in which they presently live. Second, the 500,000 settlers on the West Bank are nowhere near the obstacle to peace that you have been told. And third and finally, the way to vanquish Hamas and end violent extremism is through a peace deal with Fatah that shows that the future road to Palestinian statehood runs through negotiations and not rockets and tunnels. Let's begin by making clear what is at stake. There is simply no other solution in which Israelis and Palestinians each get what they want most: national self-determination. I respect the universalist ambitions that Manal espoused of those Israelis and Palestinians who think that they can live in one state. I respect that. But, I hope you will forgive my skepticism. Standing in a United Kingdom that can hardly keep Scotland at the bar. That the future state of Israel, situated next to the failed binational state of Syria and the failed binational state of Lebanon, will be able to hold elections in which Jews feel secure with a Palestinian prime minister and Palestinians feel secure with a Jewish prime minister. One-staters can sound persuasive when they speak about one democratic state in which everyone has individual rights. It sounds beautiful to American ears, I must admit. But do not mistake the rhetoric of individual rights for the promise of national self-determination. These, my friends, are very, very different things. Israelis want to sing Hatikva. They want to proudly fly a flag that has the Star of David. All the evidence, the polling, the Palestinian National Charter shows that most Palestinians want Islam to play an important cultural role in a future Palestinian state. Israelis and Palestinians have different national symbols, they have different national heroes, they have different national stories, and they're entitled to them. A one state will frustrate everyone and satisfy no one. Now, the two-state solution requires tremendous political will and tremendous sacrifices, of which I would never make light. For Palestinians, to give up a full right of return to Israel of 1948. For Israelis to accept borders that most military strategists agree are harder to defend. As I said, I'm not going to tell you that the two-state solution is simple or easy. What I will tell you is that it is the only outcome in which Israelis and Palestinians enjoy national self-determination, and that is what this conflict is about. To quote Peter Beinart, like democracy, the two-state solution is the worst outcome, except for all the others. Let's go on to the settlements. We all know that since the 1970s, successive Israeli governments have provided a system of economic incentives, cheaper electricity, housing, transportation, etc., to encourage Israelis to move into the West Bank. And at this point, more than 500,000 have done so. The architects of this policy were clear in their intent. Ariel Sharon famously bragged that if enough Jews moved into the West Bank, a Palestinian state that is contiguous and has integrity would be impossible. Of course, that's why Sharon's eponymous settlement, Ariel, is situated exactly halfway between the major Palestinian cities of Nablus and Ramallah. These settlements violate the Fourth Geneva Convention. They make life much more difficult for Palestinians whose water and land they often confiscate, but they do not make peace impossible. 85% of settlers live in 6% of the West Bank that borders Israel's 1967 lines. Every single peace proposal of the past decade has had one-to-one land swaps by which these settlements could remain as part of Israel without infringing on Palestinian sovereignty. That's why Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas agreed to exactly these land swaps in the 2008 negotiations. I feel very strongly that the settlements are wrong politically. They are wrong legally and they are wrong morally. But they do not prevent a two-state solution. An Israeli government that chose to create economic incentives for settlers to move out of the West Bank, just as previous governments have created incentives for them to move to the West Bank, could majorly reverse the facts on the ground today. Now, it's not going to be this government that was just formed yesterday. That government coalition includes one party leader who advocates forcefully evicting Palestinians, another who advocates annexing 60% of the West Bank, and a third who's compared the notion of a Palestinian state to the Third Reich idea of Lebensraum. It won't be this Israeli government, but that is because of the choice of these particular political leaders. It is not because of the facts on the ground. To argue that the settlements prevent peace is to succumb to the cynicism of those who designed the settlements precisely for you to think that peace was impossible. Don't afford the enemies of peace that victory. Point number 3. Of course, to get peace, you need 2 willing partners. And in the face of Hamas's toxic rhetoric and lethal rockets, it's easy to believe that peace is not attainable. Tragically, this plays right into Hamas's hands. Hamas thrives on the principle that this conflict is eternal. Its popularity soars in times of war, and it has fallen when peace seems attainable. Today, the truth is that Hamas is weaker than it's ever been in the past decade. It's lost the support of Egypt, Syria, and Iran. Last month, Israel's foremost military journalist described Hamas as, quote, in operational distress. For those who wish to defeat Hamas, the time is now and the strategy is peace. A peace deal that rewards Fatah's decade-long commitment in the West Bank to security cooperation with Israel, its willingness to cede ground on the right of return, and its commitment to nonviolence and diplomatic negotiations. By committing to a 2-state solution with Fatah, Israel can prove that the path to Palestinian statehood runs through nonviolence and negotiations, not rockets and tunnels. Continual war will prove the opposite. No, thank you. Let me close where I began. All we have is the 2-state solution. There is no other option. Just as the 1-state solution is not feasible, so too is the present situation, the status quo, untenable. For those who are living in the region today, who suffer the conflict's tragic consequences, there is not time to wait. To wait until ISIS is weaker, the Middle East is more stable, the American president has more political capital, or the international community is willing to act decisively. If you've been to the West Bank, if you've seen nonviolent demonstrators tear-gassed for exercising their most basic human rights, if you've seen Palestinian communities who have lost land and water that was rerouted to a nearby settlement, if you've seen the faces on Rothschild Boulevard as Israeli families run for the bomb shelters, if you've heard stories from Gaza firsthand of entire families blown away in a single blast, if you've ever met an Israeli husband and wife who tell you that before they go to sleep each night, they must think about which of their 3 small children they won't carry when the sirens start to swirl. If you've ever met a refugee who just wanted to go home. If you can find it in yourself to empathize and sympathize with both people affected by this tragic conflict, and if you can believe that in the cradle of one of human civilization's richest regions, 2 people might defy the odds of historical injustice and live in mutual respect, then I ask you to give your vote to those Israelis and Palestinians who have given so much for exactly that peaceful outcome. Thank you very much.